So I have finished my blind playthrough of Outlast 2 and I am ready to give you my final thoughts, my verdict on this game. And to save you some time so you don't have to listen to my rambling, I'm going to give you the overall verdict right now. And that verdict is disappointing. This game is a big disappointment for me. I had high hopes for it, but it really did not deliver. It's not that it was a completely terrible game. There were plenty of moments when I did enjoy it, where I was feeling a little spooked and a little afraid, but there were far more moments when I was either a little confused, a little frustrated, or at times just kind of ambivalent to the whole affair. It's a bit of a mixture. There were moments when I was really into it, and then plenty of moments where I was just going through the motions. I was playing a game and acutely aware of the fact that I was playing a game, and for a horror game that's pretty much the kiss of death. So after really enjoying Outlast 1, Outlast 2 is at best a mediocre experience with moments of sheer frustration and, as I've said, a great disappointment. As to why it failed to deliver the same experience, that's a little more difficult to describe, because a lot of the criticisms I have about this game could be levied at Outlast 1, and so you might be thinking I'm being a little inconsistent. However, I will try to explain why it worked in Outlast 1 but just did not work for me, at least, in Outlast 2. I will warn you, there will be the occasional minor spoiler. Nothing major, nothing about the main quest, so to speak, the main story, but there will be some minor spoilers. So if all you're interested in is my verdict, you've had it. I generally wouldn't recommend this game. It's just not one I think stands up to its peers. I mentioned the story, so let's start there. I found it to be, well, messy, to be honest. It seemed to contain a lot of very cliche elements, but it was delivered in a totally sloppy manner at really inopportune moments through these notes you would find, and gave me no real clear sense of what was going on. You know, compare that to Outlast 1. You did receive a lot of the story via notes, but it was well written notes written by, surgical staff and psychiatrists, and they were notes that you read during calm moments. In Outlast 2, they're just scrawled notes from people who can barely write, and you're often reading them knowing there's someone right round the corner, so it's all very stressful. But to be honest, it never really explained what happened, because at the end I still do not know what was real, what was not real, what any of it had to do with my childhood trauma with regards my friend, and indeed several other things. What was with all the dead birds and the bright lights? I never really understood that. Now maybe I did miss a few notes and they would have explained the whole thing, but here's the most important thing about the story. I don't care. That is damning in itself. That is probably the worst thing you can say about a story. I got to the end, I didn't really understand it, and honestly, I couldn't even be bothered looking it up and finding out. It just did nothing to make itself interesting to me. There was one exception to my ambivalence towards the story, and that is the story of my childhood trauma. What happened to my friend Jessica? I actually found that to be quite interesting, and the way they fed you the information you needed for that was pretty good. But then I generally found the school portions of this game to be more believable and creepier, more scary, definitely. There were some frustrating moments in them, but overall I would have actually liked to have seen more of the game in the school and less of it in the cornfields and in the outback buildings or wherever it was set. To be honest, I wasn't a big fan of the setting for this game. The cornfields of rural America, it on paper seems like it should be a great idea. Cornfields can be quite creepy, and of course they can be exceptionally dark and sinister, but for some reason it just didn't have the same vibe that you got in Outlast, where you were in a mental institute, or in this school, because this school was extremely creepy. I also found the game to be a little too dark when not in the school. The school was dark enough to be scary, but light enough so I could just about make my way around without the night vision. The night vision in the first game was something you generally used to improve your vision, but you didn't really need it all the time. There were a few moments, but generally speaking it was something you could use in small amounts to get a better view of a room, but then you could navigate through the room quite happily. In Outlast 2 you spend a lot of moments with the night vision on, running for your life. So many moments where you're sprinting along as fast as you can, climbing and jumping with a camera stuck to your face just so that you can see, because you quite simply cannot see 1 foot in front of your face. Whereas the people chasing you, oh, they will find you no problems. You can have no lights on, you can have the camera away, you can be hid in a bush behind a barrel and they will find you straight away. It's dark, but apparently they have a magical sixth sense. Although I have to say that's probably because they already knew where you were going, as you really don't have a lot of choices. This game feels ridiculously linear. The maps, the areas you're navigating around, they usually have 3 or 4 different routes to wherever it is you're supposed to go, and yet they're all very close to each other, and honestly it doesn't seem to matter which you pick. What matters is where you end up, and they always seem to know where you're going to be. You can almost feel the ambush coming, they know you're going to be there. Now this is one of those criticisms that could have been thrown at Outlast 1, I think. But in Outlast 1 it felt reasonable. You were in a building complex, and of course there are usually only 1 or 2 exits to the next area, and you have almost no choice but to go through them. In this game you spend a lot of time outside, and you come across lots of artificial walls, or conveniently placed walls, canyon walls, densely packed trees, small logs that look big enough to perhaps stop somebody who's 5.5 inches tall and, you know, no bigger, but for some reason manage to stop you. You have to go a certain way, and it all feels horribly artificial, and I mean it stinks of the invisible wall feeling. And this is never more obvious than the many times you are running away from things in what feel like heavily scripted moments. You know, you can almost feel them coming. You do something and you hear this voice, "There he is, chase him," and you run off and you run down this pathway and then try and go through one door, and that's not the right door, but you have to spend 3 or 4 seconds in the animation, and by the time you finish they've caught you and you've died. So now you run down again, and this time you ignore that door and you try to jump over a wall, and that doesn't work. So then you try to go towards a gateway, but that's locked, and now you're penned in. Now you die. So then you try it again. You ignore the door, you ignore the wall, you ignore the gate. This time you run towards a gap. Oh, you've managed to make it through the gap, and you hear the voices. "Oh, he got away. We'll find him later." And you think, let's go find the next thing I'm supposed to do to trigger a bunch of people who say, "Look, there he is." And you repeat. And that's just the feeling I got all of the time. Every time I was running away, it was a matter of check everything and die several times until you get the right combination. And that is my biggest criticism of this game, because that makes the game not scary. Here's the thing you need to know about, well, pretty much every game, to be honest. Dying is not scary. It really isn't. Almost dying is scary. As soon as you die, you have a feeling of relief, maybe disappointment, maybe annoyance, but the fear is over whilst you reload and try again. And each time you die, you are reminded you're playing a game, don't worry, you always get to try again. And in this game it's again and again and again until it becomes quite formulaic. You're just running around going, okay, that door didn't work last time, that didn't door, okay, this one, alright, no, I'm gonna die now, alright, let's reload, okay, not the left, not the right, through the dive over this, go into the floor, oh no, Right, I've been stabbed. Okay, right. And that's how you are. You're not scared. Death is meaningless. It's going to happen. You know it's going to happen. You almost accept that it's going to happen 3 or 4 times before you figure out the right combination. Why would you be terrified of it? Why would you be scared at all? Compare that to something like Amnesia: Dark Descent. A game that wielded fear like a surgeon wields a scalpel. That game was brilliant, and here's the thing, in my playthrough of that game, totally blind, I died 1 time. 1 time. And in fact, I actually think that 1 time I died was a bit of a weakness for the game, but I'll talk about that another time. And here's the thing, even though I wasn't dying the entire time, I have never played a game as scary as that, before or since. That game was the most terrifying game I've ever played. It really was. And yet I wasn't dying. But I constantly felt like I was almost going to. I never really spent much time running from the monster. A few times I did, but not mostly. Most of the time I felt like death was stalking me, and his bony fingers were reaching for my shoulders as I glanced around in paranoia, always wondering where this creature was going to pop out of. And then I'd suddenly hear off in the distance that and I'd think, oh my god, and I'd turn around and I'd crouch and I'd go off and hide. And I know I wasn't being chased, but I knew he was there. I knew he was there, and it was terrifying. That is how you do a horror game. And whilst we're discussing Amnesia: Dark Descent and things it did right, something else that game did was it pretty much taught you everything you needed to know to play the game very early on. You were given all of the game mechanics, you understood all the user interface hints, and it was very, very minimalistic. There was just like a hand, and it let you know you could move objects. Generally speaking, you knew what you were doing from very early on in the game, and then it became second nature. So you stopped focusing on the game mechanics. You didn't think about your keyboard, you didn't think about your mouse, you just thought about the environment. If you were trying to hide, you would pick up a chair and put it in front of a door and then climb into the wardrobe. You wouldn't be thinking, okay, left click on the chair, drag to the door, release the left click, go to the wardrobe, left click, drag back. You wouldn't think like that. That would just become second nature, and that's very important in a horror game. Unfortunately, Outlast 2 kept doing things that were new and never seen before. And an example of this would be when I was running away at one point. I ended up in this, what looked like an outhouse, and I was trying to find a way out. So I was looking for a window, I was looking for a door, and the only thing I saw very briefly was I looked down and I saw an oil can, and I saw some icon pop up like I could interact with it. And of course I'm thinking, I need a way out, not a bloody gas canister. And then I die. Next time I go in, I know there's nothing else in there, so I think, oh, I'll click on it. I look down and I realise it's not the gas canister, it's the floor. What am I supposed to do with the floor? Whatever, click it, just press the bloody button. And then it opens up the floor. I kick my way through the door and I'm thinking, I can break through floors? The thing is I never do it again, so it's not actually a game mechanic. It's a QTE event, isn't it? I'm supposed to be paying attention to user interface hints and pressing the right combination of buttons. This occurs later in 2 instances where I get grabbed and I have to wiggle the mouse. And the first time it happens, I die because I only realised what it was doing at the last second. And then the next time, I managed it just fine, but I shouldn't have to die once to learn a mechanic in a game like this, and more importantly, I really shouldn't have to look at the UI hints in a game like this. Again, look at Amnesia Descent. You really did not have to pay much attention to the UI. Or at least the moments you did, usually during puzzles, you had plenty of time. You were quite relaxed, there was no stress involved, and you were in puzzle solving mode. And I actually did feel that the puzzles in that game were a teeny bit too gamey. I did say that in my review. I did feel they were a little gamey. But generally, throughout that game, I never thought about the user interface prompts. I couldn't even tell you what the prompt was in certain places. I just seemed to remember a hand, and that was it. And everything else felt instinctive. Outlast 2, again, I'm going to say it felt a little like a QTE event game. Sorry, QTE event, a QuickTime event game. And let's face it, that's the last thing you want in a horror game. Because any time you're thinking about your keys or your mouse or anything like that, anytime you're doing something that's not totally instinctive and totally practiced, you are stepping out of the game and concentrating on real life. That is not scary. It does not promote fear. It promotes frustration in people like me. And of course, that's what it all comes down to. This game just does not work for me. Now, some people might be thinking I'm complaining for no reason, and that these kind of UI hints are just the way games should be, and that's the sort of game you enjoy. And if so, you may enjoy Outlast 2. And maybe you like these scripted events where you run away and constantly have to try different things until you get it right. I don't know. All I can tell you is this is not the sort of game for someone like me. And this is why it's disappointing. Because of course Outlast 1 was a great game for me. Even though occasionally it shared some of the features with Outlast 2, they never upset me the way it did in this game. The game as in general felt creepy, it felt scary, and I spent most of my time genuinely wandering between nervous and utterly terrified. And I don't remember any moments of just sheer frustration or boredom where, you know, I'd just be going through the motions. So I will accept this just might be not the right sort of game for me. It's just odd that the first one was. Oh, I almost forgot. I want to talk about the bad guys, the things chasing you. Now, in all of the games I've mentioned, there are a variety of bad guys. You know, you had like the Karnak in Amnesia, and in Outlast you did have the brothers, and you had lots of other inmates chasing you. But you had a primary bad guy in Outlast 1. You had Chris, this big, lumbering, almost Frankenstein's monster type guy. Kind of reminded me of the monster in Amnesia Dark Descent. A monster that I almost never saw in my playthrough, and the few times I saw him, I just got this impression of a large, lumbering, violent killing machine. In Outlast 1, I got the same feeling. He was large, he was terrifying. But for Outlast 2, it was almost like the devs got around and said, okay, in the first game we had this big guy who was scary, right? So what we'll do this time is we'll have a guy who's big and scary, but we'll have a midget on his shoulders, right? No, that's not all, wait for it. And the midget will have a crossbow, and he'll fire flaming arrows. And everyone sat around and went, whoa, that's a great idea. No, it's not a great idea, it's ludicrous. It's straight out of Mad Max 3 Beyond the Thunderdome for a start. But more importantly, it's just kind of comical. Yes, he's scary in the same way a gorilla with a chainsaw would be scary. But also a little kind of like, wait, what? You know, you just look at it and think, sorry, you've jumped the shark a little here. What's next? A gorilla with a chainsaw and laser beams coming from its eyes? I mean, it just felt like they were trying too hard and kind of missing the mark. They were going into almost comical levels. Now, I'm willing to accept that I may be being overly critical. I may have had too high expectations because I loved the first game. But I feel that honestly this game fell short. It was though it was trying to take a lot of the things that worked in the first game and just push them too far or use them in the wrong way, in the wrong places, and they just didn't get the formula right. For me, this game was a big letdown. It was mediocre and frustrating at the same time, and I can tell you the only reason I managed to get through it was because I knew it was a short game. Halfway through this game, I came close to quitting in a mix of frustration and, to be honest, just sort of, I don't know, ambivalence. Not exactly boredom, but just not really caring for it. So that's it. That's where I am with this game. I couldn't really recommend it. I wouldn't say it was the horror game I enjoyed the most, or not even. I mean, to be honest, I enjoyed it a little, and had it been the first game of an independent company trying their hand at horror, I would have said, you know what, it was okay in places, good effort, try again next time. But for a company who released Outlast 1, this was a massive step backwards.